What's up, YouTubers? This is week 2 of our series, Two Doctors, One Conversation. Dr. Duyan and I are going to be exploring the consequences of physical activity and nutrition on the brain. Stay tuned. Hello, everyone, and we have Dr. Duyan here with us today. Today, we're going to be talking about the effects of physical activity and nutrition on the brain, and give you guys some different tips and tools that you can use to really engage in the appropriate amount of physical activity, as well as eating foods that are going to benefit your brain and your brain health. Welcome to my channel again, Dr. Duyan. Thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate you being here. Again, for those who did not see your video last week, could you please introduce yourself once again to the viewers?
Sure. So thank you for having me. So I'm Dr. Philippe Duyan. I'm a board certified neurologist. I'm an epilepsy specialist. I am the founder of the health and wellness company called the Inley Brain Fit Institute, where we create exercise programs for people based on their medical and neurological needs. I'm the author of the book, Neuroplasticity, Your Brain's Superpower, where we talk about how our brain evolves, how it learns, how it heals. And I am the creator of the game, the app, Dr. Duyan's Brain Fit, which teaches people about how food and exercise impacts their overall health, but especially the health of their brain.
Very good summary. Thank you so much. So we're talking about something that I know is near and dear to both of our hearts. That's how we actually met, was the fact that we share a very similar philosophy on physical activity and nutrition and how it plays a vital part in all of our lives and our livelihoods. So I guess we could start off with physical activity. Well, first off, I know that you have your own story to share as far as how nutrition and physical activity has impacted your life. Do you care to share a bit of that with our viewers?
Yeah, so, a lot of people look at me and they look at the fact that I'm a doctor, but I'm also a patient. And I've been a patient since I was 18. As of today, I'm 41. When I was 18, I was diagnosed with kidney failure. And when I was 28, about 8 days after graduating from medical school, I had a kidney transplant. And what allowed me to recover so well from that was the fact that I was physically active. As soon as I could, I started to exercise. The surgery and the medications that I was on took such a huge toll on my body that I lost about 40 pounds. I was having a lot of side effects from the medication, and to really build myself back up, I needed to start moving my body, right? And that's what has kept me strong and healthy throughout the years, was making a really conscious effort to find ways to exercise on a regular basis, and also to make a really conscious effort to eat as healthy as possible, right? And to avoid things that are not so healthy for the body.
Wow, thank you so much for sharing. I know myself, I've also had quite a bit of history with physical activity, and even just going through life being an athlete and being injured. And for me, it was not valuing or understanding the role of nutrition. That was my deterrent. That's what happened. I was overtraining. I wasn't eating enough. I wasn't eating the appropriate things. Ended up having 2 different surgeries, one on my rotator cuff and one on my left ankle. And I mean, that did so much to my personal identity, just who I am as a person. And this is after the education, this is after everything. And it just goes to show that no matter where you are, how much education that you have about physical activity or nutrition, overweight and obesity can happen to anyone. Anyone could struggle with their weight, regardless. Different things happen in life, and you kind of have to rebound from it. but understanding the importance and why we should engage in it is really important. So I wanted to come today and really talk about that. And I know physical activity has been associated with a number of physical and mental disorders, or reducing those physical and mental disorders, such as Alzheimer's. You have different types of cancers and depression and anxiety. There's all kinds of meta-analysis and research out there on these different conditions. Can we discuss some of these in greater detail, especially for people who might need more information moving forward? How can, from your perspective, especially with your authority on the human brain, how can exercise and physical activity impact depression and anxiety?
So those are all really great points. And so I'm going to start out by saying that when we're living a sedentary lifestyle, where we're not being physically active, that is actually killing our brain. That is physically shrinking our brain. And I don't know if you or any of your audience has ever gone diving, but if you have the opportunity to go diving, you may see an animal called a sea squirt. And so when a sea squirt has a neurological journey that mirrors that of human beings, which is really incredible. So when a sea squirt is born, it is a tadpole. It's got a tail, it moves around, it has its own version of a central nervous system, so it's got a brain and spinal cord. And within the first 12 to 72 hours of its life, the entire purpose of the sea squirt is to find one particular place where it could park itself and never have to move again. Right? So from that one particular place, it'll be able to feed itself, it'll be able to reproduce itself. And so the most incredible thing happens once it does that. Its body starts to release enzyme that causes its brain and spinal cord to deteriorate. And over time, what was a fully functioning brain and spinal cord becomes just this rudimentary cell, this rudimentary nerve cell. So it's essentially lost all of its central nervous system. We see the same thing happen with human beings. When human beings stop moving, their brains start to shrink. Okay? The reality is that physical activity, exercising, gives our body and our brain everything it needs to function optimally. In fact, when we are exercising, our brain and our body release a chemical called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And that chemical allows the brain to make new neurons, new nerve cells, and new connections. So it's incredibly vital that we're constantly moving. For that reason, when we look at things like depression and anxiety, exercise is the best antidepressant, anti-anxiety treatment that we have. I know doctors who, the way that they manage their anxiety is that they exercise every day, right? And that exercise can look like anything. If you're somebody who loves to play a sport, they find a way to play that sport every day. If you're somebody who loves to dance, they find a way to dance 3, 4, or 5 times a week. The reality is our bodies are meant to move. Our bodies are meant to run, jump, squat, lift things, right? Dance. And controlling that is our brains. And if you're not doing those things, you're essentially telling your brain, well, I'm not doing those things, so I don't need to devote all this time and energy to keeping the brain as healthy as possible. Absolutely.
So cognitive function, all of that stuff is directly impacted by exercise. I mean, as you just said, do you think there's a difference between engaging in aerobic exercise and that of resistance training?
Yeah, so I think the studies have shown that aerobic exercise is incredibly important, right? But even more important is something that can combine aerobic exercise with complex motor movements. So certain sports are great for that, right? So I grew up playing and competing in tennis, and I recently wrote an article entitled Serena Williams, the epitome of a super brain, because sports like tennis literally give your brain everything you need to be successful on and off the court. And so if we use someone like Serena as an example, and we can say this about all high-level athletes, But you look at Serena. Serena can speak multiple languages, right? She can deliver a victory speech in French and Italian. Obviously, she speaks English. Her bio says that she can also speak some Spanish. But it's not like she spends years on end in France or Italy. But the fact that she is constantly exercising, constantly moving, allows her brain to efficiently pick up new languages. When you look at her, Serena, and her sister Venus, right, they're successful, obviously, on the tennis court. But they're also, while they were at the top of the game and competing for all these grand slams, right, they were also in school, right? So they were doing both. They're successful in business. And so I think a lot of that has to do with just the fact that they're constantly exercising. Again, it's just allowing their brains to efficiently process information.
Absolutely. It's a great example. One of my favorites. With that information, do you think that an older adult would have a different reaction to physical activity than, say, a child would, based on their neurological development?
So I think that exercising at any age is going to be great for you. But the sooner that you get into the habit of doing it, the better, right? And so there are studies that show that in people with some cognitive impairment, that if they start engaging in regular walking, that some of that cognitive impairment improves. But you don't want to get to a place where you're already cognitively impaired to start a physical activity regimen. Right? You want to start really early. It's the best thing that you can do for your brain and your body to regularly exercise. Helps prevent most diseases, including things like dementia, Alzheimer's disease, and some of the other neurological diseases that people tend to be rightfully afraid of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. I've read a couple of studies about the link between exercise training and brain morphology as people age, and how the hippocampus and the temporal lobe are larger in individuals who exercise and who are highly fit versus those who were not active in their younger adult years as they get older. Do you have anything that you would like to add to that, or?
Yeah, so we used to think that our brains never evolved, right? That we were born with a certain amount of neurons, a certain amount of nerve cells. And the only thing that would happen is that as we get older, maybe we'd lose some of those, or we might lose some to some kind of brain injury, right? But we now know very differently. We now know that our brains are always evolving, as long as we're giving our brains what it needs. We know that our brains can always make new neurons and new connections, especially if we're living really healthy lifestyles and we're challenging our bodies and brains in different ways. And we see the bulk of neuroplasticity happen. So your brain's ability to make new neurons, to make new connections, the bulk of that happens in the hippocampus, which is part of the temporal lobe.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. With that, I mean, do you feel that nutrition, or based on the science, does nutrition impact the development of the hippocampus and the rest of the medial temporal lobe as well as the exercise?
Well, I think people forget what the real purpose of food is, right? I think the real purpose of food is to keep us alive, right? It is to keep us healthy. It is to help us heal if we are sick or injured. And yet, it's to give us the energy that we need to go about our day and to live the lifestyles that we have, right? But yet people associate food with pleasure. We've been conditioned to think about food as pleasure. We've been conditioned to think about eating in times where we are alone, right? Where we're feeling lonely or where we're feeling down. We've been conditioned to think about how food is always supposed to taste good. Okay? And if foods don't stimulate our taste buds in ways that we'd like them to, then we don't eat it. If foods don't stimulate the parts of our brains that are responsible for motivation and reward and addiction, then we don't eat it, right? But if it does, if whatever we're eating does stimulate those parts of our brains, then we consume it in large quantities. And I think that's where we get in trouble with things like junk food and the processed foods, right? Is that they purposely stimulate parts of our brains so that we're constantly going back to them. As a result, you see things like obesity, you see really high levels of preventable chronic diseases, especially things like diabetes. And a lot of neurologists and neuroscientists will tell you that there is such a close link between type 2 diabetes and Alzheimer's disease that there are some people that actually consider Alzheimer's disease to be type 3 diabetes. And even if you don't agree with that, the reality is that when people have uncontrolled diabetes, when they have uncontrolled high blood pressure, there are changes that take place in the brain that we can actually see on CAT scans and MRIs. And so it has a really negative impact on the brain. And over time, that impact can lead to dementia, whether you want to call it a vascular dementia or an Alzheimer's disease. The end result will be the same, that person is going to have memory problems. They're going to have cognitive problems. And they're not going to be able to live the life that they want to live.
Yeah, I do agree that food is so much more than what we eat. In my nutrition practice, I tell people all the time, food actually tells a story. It tells your body what to do, what hormones to express or suppress. It tells you whether your metabolism needs to speed up or slow down. It tells your body so much. It is literally the instruction manual for how your body operates. So that's why it's really important to put good food into your body so that your body can actually do the things that are going to help you live longer. So I wanted to ask you, how does the brain react differently when you give it a diet rich in sugars and saturated fats and, high, really dense caloric food versus whole foods, greens and foods that are going to provide enough potassium for the rest of the day, those types of things. How does your body or your brain physically react to the differences?
So there have actually been studies that have looked at the PET scans of brains of people who have your traditional Western diet, which is high in salt, high in processed foods, high calorie, high sugar, versus people who have more of a Mediterranean diet. So a lot of fish, a lot of grains, a lot of seeds, a lot of fruits and vegetables. Right? And so when you do a PET scan, you're looking at how the brain is metabolizing energy. And so what these PET scans have shown is that the people who tend to eat more of a Mediterranean diet, their brains utilize energy really, really well. And people who tend to eat more of a Western diet, their brains don't utilize energy really well. So the reality is that what we eat has a significant impact on their brain. And so the tagline for my company, it's on our wristbands, it's on t-shirts, says one brain, one body. Because the reality is that everything that you put into your body affects your brain, and everything you do to your brain affects your body. Right? Mm-hmm. And one of the things I think people don't realize is that it takes a lot of work to digest food. If you are taking in the processed foods, a lot of meats, things that are really hard on your digestive system, what ends up happening is all of that work that it takes produces toxins. All of that work damages cells. And as a result, you get this massive immune response, right? And so you get inflammation everywhere. And that inflammation is not just isolated to your intestines. Those inflammatory molecules can go everywhere in your body, and that includes your brain. And so for that reason, even as a neurologist, there are plenty of times where we are prescribing diets to help with neurological issues, especially things like epilepsy or seizure disorders. And we see that with certain diets, that seizure frequency will decrease. Wow.
You touched a little bit on the Western diet, and eating meat. Are there specific meats that are more harmful and more difficult to digest than others?
Well, I think that the byproducts of red meat can be really difficult on the human body. And I'm somebody who feels that we're probably not designed to eat meats in the quantities that we tend to eat them, right? I mean, people will have a massive plate of food where 3/4 of it is meat, or even half of it is meat. And I don't know if we were designed to eat meat like that, right? As we've evolved over time. And so I know for me, now I eat less and less meat. Sometimes I still have. I don't eat red meat at all. But even when I do eat meat, I tend to eat it in much smaller quantities.
Awesome. And how has that made you feel? You know that I'm a huge proponent of plant-based diets, primarily plant-based diets. But did you notice a change when you started cutting back on the meat?
Yeah. So there was actually a 2-3 month period where I didn't eat any meat. And I noticed that I felt significantly lighter, right? I felt healthier. I felt like I had more energy.
Yeah. Okay. Glad to hear it. You heard it from a physician, guys. So it really does. I feel the same way. I grew up primarily vegetarian, and then in college I started eating chicken. Well, it's mostly Chinese food. It smelled so good, and I just had to have some. And as time went on, it became a regular staple in my diet. And then I never had challenges with weight until I started eating meat, ever. Never, ever, like long after college. But I also started to feel very heavy and lethargic, and I was always wanting to sleep all the time.
Yeah.
And one day it was like something just clicked, like, why are you eating meat? You don't need to, and I was very blessed to have a father who could throw down in the kitchen. Like, that man could cook his butt. I knew how to fix vegetables and all kinds of, manipulate meals and stuff like that to make veggie meat substitutes that were primarily made out of nuts and seeds. So it was easy to go back, and I instantly, not only did I feel better, I felt clear. I have very clear thinking when I am primarily plant-based, and I don't have weight issues as much. So for people who are trying to lean out or really trying to maintain their physique, eating more plants, it helps. And it's not just because they have less calories. They do have less calories, but they also have the fiber component, or the fibrous component as well, that helps keep you lean. And it also helps help fuel your brain, and some of the things that Dr. DeLeon was referring to as well. So there are several studies out there that talk about thinking and how food can help modulate your neural activity in terms of some of the brain areas that we were referring to earlier, but also in the form of appetite. Can you talk a little bit about appetite and how that relates to everything that we're discussing today?
Yeah, so I don't think a lot of people realize that your appetite is actually controlled by leptin, which impacts your brain, right? So it's your appetite is especially controlled by a part of your brain called your hypothalamus, and how foods sort of interact with this area is really important. And a lot of the things that we eat, not only impact the hypothalamus, but they impact your reward, motivation, and addiction parts of your brain, the parts of the brain that are responsible for secreting and responding to dopamine. Right? And so there are foods that you eat that will make you feel good as a result because they cause surges in dopamine. But there are foods that you eat that you're just going to continue to want to come back for more. And a lot of what we eat has a significant impact on the brain. So you had mentioned Chinese food before, and it made me think of MSG, right? So MSG is put in a lot of Chinese food, and MSG stands for monosodium glutamate. Glutamate is the major excitatory neurotransmitter in the brain. So glutamate stimulates the brain, and it gets put into a lot of foods because it adds flavor to a lot of foods. It makes them taste good, right? But because glutamate is so excitatory, it's actually a trigger for things like migraines and seizures, right? So other chemicals, so casein, which is a protein powder that you see in a lot of supplements that people will use at the gym. And casein can be found in things like cow's milk. But casein is incredibly addictive. It's so addictive that it is considered the nicotine of foods. So we've got to be really mindful about what we put into our bodies, the chemicals that get put into these different foods, and how it impacts not only our brains, but our motivations to continue eating those foods.
Wow. And I never even realized that about casein. I used to take it religiously when I was doing CrossFit. Bodybuilders use it all the time because it helps with muscle gain, even though there are, in my opinion, much better sources of protein to get your grams of protein, which I'm actually going to touch on in another video, and just the fact that we eat too much protein in our bodies and how that impacts, or how that relationship that is with insulin, and which is why so many people can't lose weight to begin with, because insulin is always present, is always active, and people can't lose weight if insulin is on.
Yeah.
Basically. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I think people often think about like, oh, I don't want to eat fatty foods because then I get fat. And that's not actually what happens. Healthy fats are really good for you. Mm-hmm. The problem is with the carbohydrates, right? Because when you eat carbohydrates, like you eat a lot of rice, your body breaks that down into sugar. And sugar is really harmful to your body and your brain. Mm-hmm. In order for your body to take up that sugar, it needs to secrete insulin. Okay? And so when you're secreting insulin at really large amounts, insulin is your body's biggest growth factor, meaning that insulin makes you get big. It makes you put on weight. So if you've got a lot of insulin flowing around, it's going to make you put on a whole bunch of weight. And if you're eating so many carbs, so much sugar, that now your body can't even take it up, the insulin can't even take it up to put it into the cells, that's when you develop type 2 diabetes. Mm-hmm. Right? So the carbs are really important to minimize, and regulating your insulin is really important also.
Yeah, definitely. For those of you who are watching who are interested in learning more about this, I will be creating a video within the next week on intermittent fasting and how I personally love intermittent fasting as a primary tool to help regulate insulin and making it possible for your body to actually lose the weight, and how often you should be eating depending on your body type. Some people, I see people who have androgen type body types, and they're eating every 2 to 3 hours, and their insulin levels never drop down below a certain threshold. They just can't lose weight because their blood glucose and their blood insulin levels are always super high. And so many people, even when you go to the doctor and they do a glucose test, they'll do a fasting glucose test, but they won't do a fasting insulin test, because by the time most people go to the doctor, they've already eaten something, and so their insulin level is too high. How do you think that people can help? I know this video is not necessarily about insulin, but I know people are out there probably wondering, if insulin is such an important factor in my weight loss or me maintaining my body composition, how can I regulate my insulin at home without a test?
So you need to minimize the amount of carbohydrates that you take in. You minimize the amount of carbs that's in your diet. And carbohydrates is not even the most efficient fuel source for the brain. So sugar is not the most efficient fuel source for the brain, right? If you eat a diet that is high in carbs, high in sugar, we all get that huge energy surge for a few minutes. But then a little bit later, we all get really, really tired, right? And sort of the itis kicks in, right? And you need to like take a nap. The reason that happens is that when you're eating foods that are high in carbs, high in sugar, right, your sugar levels spike really, really quickly. And as a result, you get a surge of energy. But then it drops pretty much just as quickly. And then you get really, really tired. And if you're going to eat carbs, you've got to be eating what we call complex carbs, which really are your vegetables, right? Because what happens then is as your body breaks that down, you don't get a spike in blood sugar or insulin with the complex carbs. It takes some work. It takes a little bit of time for your body to break that down. So it slowly goes up, your sugar levels, and it kind of stays up for a little while, and then it slowly goes down. And so your energy is much more consistent, which is much better for your overall health and much better for your brain health.
Absolutely. And it does that because it has the fibrous component that we were talking about a little bit earlier. The fiber helps protect against, I just say crash and burning, because that's how it feels when your blood sugar goes up and down like that. You have this huge surge of energy, and then all of a sudden it's just like, like you're comatose. So for those of you who are out there, making sure you are consuming especially green leafy vegetables, that's going to really help keep your blood sugar pretty level. You won't have those huge crashes throughout the day, and it will also make sure that you have the fiber that's going to help scrub your intestines and keep things moving as we want them to. So that's all I have for today. I thank you so much for your time. I know you are busy saving the world, and I know you're based in New York as well. So please stay safe out there. And thank you again.
Please comment, like, and subscribe below. Please check back every week as I'll be adding new content on a weekly basis.